Anytime you're running CI/CD, you eventually need secrets. Things like database URLs, API keys, and tokens. The real question is how you manage those secrets. In this video, I'm going to show you how to fetch secrets from Infisical directly into a GitHub Actions workflow, instead of hard coding them or storing them long-term in GitHub. Using a secrets manager like Infisical gives you a single place to manage, rotate, and control access to secrets across all your environments, which really starts to matter once you have multiple workflows. I'll show how GitHub Actions can authenticate to Infisical using OIDC and request secrets at runtime. By the end of this video, you'll see a simple production-ready pattern for using Infisical in GitHub Actions, where secrets are fetched dynamically at runtime and access is based on verified identity, not stored credentials. Before we talk about how to authenticate securely, it's worth stepping back and taking a look at how secrets are usually managed in CI/CD and what's missing. In many setups, secrets end up scattered across pipelines. They're stored directly in GitHub, copied between repositories, duplicated across environments, and then manually updated whenever something changes. Now, this works at first when you have a small number of pipelines, but as teams grow and CI/CD expands across dozens or even hundreds of workflows, pipelines, repositories, and environments, it starts to break down. Secrets get copied from repo to repo. Different environments drift out of sync, and the same credentials end up reused far more widely than intended. At that point, every secret starts to carry a much larger blast radius. A single leaked credential can impact multiple services, environments, or pipelines, not because it was designed that way, but because it's been reused everywhere. Rotation becomes risky and time-consuming. Instead of updating one place, you're forced to hunt through workflows asking the following: which pipelines depend on this value? Which environments are still using the old version? And what might break if I rotate it? And because rotation is painful, secrets tend to stick around far longer than they should, simply because changing them feels dangerous. And over time, it becomes difficult to answer a basic question: who had access to this secret and when? There's no clear audit trail, no single place to reason about access, and no easy way to understand how secrets flow through your CI/CD system. This pattern, secrets spread across repositories, pipelines, and environments with growing blast radius and shrinking visibility, is something that people refer to as secret sprawl. A secrets manager is designed to solve exactly this problem. Instead of scattering secrets across pipelines, everything lives in one centralized place with clear environment scoping, fine-grained access control, and auditability built in. Infisical provides that centralized foundation. And just as importantly, it gives CI/CD pipelines a secure way to fetch secrets at runtime. So once you decide to use a secrets manager like Infisical, the next question becomes obvious. How does a CI/CD workflow actually authenticate to fetch those secrets? In many setups, the answer is a static API key or token. You generate a credential in Secrets Manager, store it in GitHub Secrets, and then use that to fetch everything else at runtime. This is where teams actually recreate a familiar problem. That first credential, the one you stored in GitHub, becomes your secret zero. It's the root secret that everything else depends on. If it leaks, is misscoped, or expires, every system downstream becomes affected. And because it's long-lived, it tends to stick around a lot longer than it should. So even though you've centralized your secrets in a manager, you've still anchored trust to a static credential sitting at rest in GitHub. That's the pitfall we want to avoid. Instead of authenticating with a stored secret, we want workflows to authenticate based on their respective workload identity. This is where OIDC authentication comes in, and it's something that Infisical supports natively. With OIDC auth, GitHub can prove who it is at runtime, which repository it's running in, which workflow is executing, and what context it's running under. There's no long-lived credential to store and nothing permanent to rotate. That identity-based model is what lets us fetch secrets securely without reintroducing secret zero. Now that we've covered the why, let's walk through how to set this up in Infisical. First, inside Infisical, I'm going to open up a project. This is where our secrets are going to live. Within that project, I have a dev environment, and I've added a realistic set of secrets that a CI pipeline would actually need. Docker registry credentials. In this case, that's a Docker username and Docker password, which we'll use to authenticate and push an image as part of the workflow. Next, we'll need a way for GitHub Actions to authenticate to Infisical. And this is where machine identities come in. A machine identity in Infisical is a service account designed for workloads like CI/CD, servers, or jobs. It defines what an automated system is allowed to access without tying that access to a user account. I'm going to create one under access control, machine identities. And I've scoped this machine identity with a role that only allows access to the specific secrets it needs. Now, by default, it'll be set up to use universal auth. This relies on static credentials like a client ID and secret. That works, but for CI/CD, we want to avoid the long-lived credentials problem we talked about earlier. So instead, we'll remove this and we'll switch this identity to use OIDC auth with GitHub. Here's where we scope exactly what this identity is allowed to trust. First, we define the subject. This tells Infisical which GitHub workflow is allowed to authenticate. For GitHub Actions, the subject is derived from the repository and where the workflow is running, like a a specific branch or environment. The full subject and audience formats are documented, and I'll link those docs below so you can copy them exactly when you're setting this up. So instead of saying any workflow from GitHub, we're saying specifically this repository running in this context are allowed to request these secrets. Next, we define the audience. This is who the token is intended for. By default, it's set to the GitHub organization that owns the repository. Infisical checks this against the audience claim in the token to ensure that it hasn't been reused somewhere it shouldn't be. Together, these settings make the trust relationship very explicit. Only workflows that match the repository, context, and audience we've defined here will be able to authenticate and fetch secrets. Now, once that's set up, Infisical gives me an identity ID. This is what we'll reference inside the GitHub Actions workflow. And this is important. The identity ID is not a secret. It's just an identifier, safe to commit directly into your workflow YAML. At this point, Infisical is ready. We've defined what secrets exist, and we've defined who or what is allowed to request them without creating any static credentials. Now let's switch over to our GitHub Actions workflow itself and see how this comes together. Inside the repository, I have a simple workflow under .github/workflows. This workflow is manually triggered so we can run it on demand while we're testing. At the top of the workflow, there's one important permissions block. ID token write. We explicitly allow this because this is what allows GitHub to issue an OIDC token for this run. Without this, OIDC authentication won't work. Now for the core of the workflow, the Infisical Secrets action. This step is responsible for authenticating to Infisical and fetching secrets at runtime. We'll tell it to use the OIDC method, pass in the identity ID from Infisical, and specify which project and environment we want secrets from. What's important here is what you don't see. There are no GitHub secrets configured, there's no API key, and there's no long-lived credentials stored anywhere in this repository. This workflow is trusted purely based on its identity, which workflow it's running in, which repo it is, and which claims are attached to that run. Once this step completes, any secrets fetched from Infisical are injected as environment variables and available to any steps that follow. So what actually happens when this Infisical step runs? When the workflow starts, GitHub generates a short-lived OIDC token just for this specific job. That token contains claims about where it's running, the repository, the workflow, and the organization. The Infisical Secrets action takes that token and sends it to Infisical as proof of identity. Infisical verifies those claims against the machine identity we configured earlier. If everything matches, the workflow, the repo, the permissions, Infisical issues a short-lived access token. The Infisical Secrets action then uses that token to securely fetch secrets requested for the specific project and environment. And one subtle thing, if identity and permissions don't match, Infisical intentionally returns a 404 instead of a 403 so that you don't leak project existence. At that point, those secrets are injected directly into the workflow as environment variables. There's no file written unless you explicitly ask for one, and nothing is persisted beyond this job execution. This is the key difference from traditional CI setups. Instead of pulling secrets using a static credential that lives forever, we're fetching them dynamically based on a verified identity that only exists for the duration of this run. Once the job finishes, the token expires, the environment is torn down, and the secrets are gone automatically. Now that the secrets are available, we can actually use them in the workflow. In the next step, I'm referencing Docker username and Docker password just like any other environment variables. Those credentials are fetched from Infisical at runtime and injected directly into this job, so the workflow can authenticate to Docker registry and push an image. This is how secrets fetched from Infisical are used safely inside real CI/CD jobs. And because those secrets only exist for the duration of this job, there's no risk of them sticking around afterwards. Once the workflow finishes, the environment is torn down and the secrets disappear with it. There's no cleanup required. This is what makes this pattern so powerful. You get the convenience of environment variables without relying on long-lived credentials stored in your CI system. Now let's actually run this workflow and see this end to end. Because this workflow uses a manual trigger, I can run it directly from the GitHub Actions tab. Once it starts, you can see each step execute in order, including the Infisical Secrets action authenticating via OIDC. Notice we're not seeing any static credentials in the logs. Authentication is handled through identity instead. And when the job reaches the Docker authentication step, you can see the login succeeded. And shortly after, the image is built and pushed successfully. And we could see in Docker Hub that our new image was pushed and built successfully, tagged with the number of our most recent GitHub workflows run. And that's the full flow. GitHub proves its identity, Infisical verifies it, secrets are fetched just in time, and everything's cleaned up automatically at the end of the run. So to zoom out for a second, the real problem that we started out with is that secrets tend to end up scattered across repositories, pipelines, and environments, making it hard to understand who owns them, how they're rotated, and who and what actually had access and when. This pattern flips that around. Instead of managing secrets separately in your CI system, everything lives centrally in one place, with clear scoping, auditability, and access control. And workflows only get what they need when they need it. Access is no longer based on static credentials, but on identity, which repository is running, which workflow is executing, and what exactly it's allowed to do. This makes permissions much easier to reason about and much easier to scale across teams and environments. It also means far less operational overhead. You're no longer chasing down secrets across pipelines, manually rotating credentials, or worrying about cleaning up after a job finishes. Everything is issued just in time and expires automatically. And while we focused on GitHub Actions here, this same model applies anywhere you can use OIDC. Infisical also supports other authentication methods, like AWS IAM or Universal Auth, depending on where your workloads are running. If you're building or managing CI/CD pipelines today, this is a great foundation to start from. Centralized, secure by default, and flexible as your setup grows. If you want to try this yourself, I'll link the docs and the example workflow below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.